what is the best insect species to keep for anybody at any level of the hobby. And I hate to pick a favorite, but really, in terms of activity levels, appearance, ease of care. So the next question is, how has the pet bug hobby changed since I was a kid? And what are some of the differences between then and now? And that's a really broad question. There have been a lot of changes. I would say that one of the greatest changes is technology, the existence of the internet. It has changed my life. It's changed everybody's life. But the change for me was that it allowed me to connect with other people who had a similar interest as I do in bugs. I was always interested in bugs from the very beginning, from my earliest days as a small child. And when I got online, when the internet came around, I was there from the very beginning. My dad actually put up a website about padlocks years before I put up my own website about bugs, which again I did in 1997. And the internet has changed everything. It's allowed us to have access to people with the similar interests, but also to the insects, from around the country, and in some cases from around the world. And that's just been a real treat. It's a wonderful time to be alive. I always like to talk about how grateful I am to have been born when I was. And we have, at my age now, in my mid-40s, we have the benefit of perspective. We know what it was like before the internet and before cell phones and smartphones, so that we appreciate now how wonderful these technologies are and how much they've done for the world. And things change all the time, even right down to the name of species. And so the hobby is always fresh and exciting. And I have an example here. This species, this is a whip spider from Arizona. Some people call them tailless whip scorpions. And there is another species from Africa that was made popular in the Harry Potter movies. And so people who are outside of the hobby, when they see this animal, the first thing they think of is what they saw in the Harry Potter film. But this species, when I first came to know it, it was named Paraphrynus mexicanus. And only a few years ago did they reclassify it to Paraphrynus carolini. And these are very gentle animals. I'll give you a close-up here. They, in many cases, can only detect light at the most. They don't have vision like we do, and so they use these front whips here to tap around in caves and in between rock crevices as they look for their prey. And these are isopods, pill bugs and sow bugs. Pill bugs roll up into a ball, and sow bugs do not. Some parts of the world, like in the UK, they call them wood lice. And the question asked was, can these be kept with millipedes? It's very common and popular for people to keep sow bugs like this in their pet bug tanks because they serve as cleaners, a cleanup crew, along with springtails pretty frequently, which are very, very tiny little bugs that feed on mold. The isopods will feed on the droppings of other pet bugs and reptiles and amphibians, and eat up the uneaten bits of food that your pet in the tank might otherwise leave in the tank. Little bits of food that fall out of your pet bug's mouth or your pet herp's mouth. And it's a pretty recurring question about whether millipedes should be kept with the isopods. They actually do really well together. They're capable of thriving together in the same tank, as long as the population of one or the other isn't too out of control. I would say that the main concern people have about them is whether the isopods will eat either molting millipedes or the eggs of millipedes. And those are valid concerns. It probably depends a little bit on what the species in question in that particular tank are, what the millipede is, what kind of isopod you're keeping in there with it. If you are using the isopods as a cleanup crew for the millipedes, they're not going to really make a huge impact. Millipedes will turn the substrate over, convert it into frass or droppings very quickly, faster than the isopods, which themselves do pretty much the same thing. They will both work together, in my experience, to create lots of frass and entirely convert the substrate together to frass. If breeding millipedes is your goal, it would probably be advisable not to keep isopods in with your millipedes, but if keeping an interesting tank is your goal, where you have a combination of a few different kinds of bugs in the same tank, they are wonderful tank mates together, and it makes the tank much more interesting to look at, in my opinion. Especially if you have some climbing structures in there and everything, you can see both animals kind of climbing up and around there. And the millipedes and the isopods will be out more in the later or evening or nighttime hours of the day. Always fun to check in on your tank later in the day. So bottom line is, if you're breeding, you're probably better off not having them in there, the isopods with the millipedes. And the same in reverse is true. If you're trying to raise the isopods and reproduce them in really good numbers, the millipedes are going to be competing for and using up those same substrate food resources as the isopods are. So better to keep them apart if breeding is the goal. Thank you for the question. My favorite mantis species to keep. I get this question so much. But I sell bugs, I sell mantises, and so you may be surprised to hear, it doesn't particularly frustrate me. I am grateful for the question. Keeping. I don't consider myself a keeper so much. I get new things in all the time, and then I sell them. That's the game for me. That's what I enjoy. I enjoy being in the middle between breeder and the end buyer. It's very interesting for me. It means I get to talk to the maximum number of people possible, and it means that I get to serve the maximum number of people possible, and that's what I really like to do. I obviously love the bugs. There's no depth to my passion for them. And so to answer this question, I usually think about it or from the perspective of my customer. And so how I answer it is with the species that I like to recommend to people the most. And that species is the spiny flower mantis. And aside from the adult being so beautiful, when I got into the hobby, back in the 90s, they were as often called number 9 mantises because of the little shape. And of course I made the shape of a 6, but they were called number 9 mantises. As often as they were called spiny flower mantises. Now that name has sort of lost favor over time, and for good reason. There are some other flower mantis species in the hobby too that are not as spiny, the creobroder, whereas the spiny flower mantises are the pseudo-creobroder. So, no, pseudo-creobotra. You probably think I'm really good at this Latin stuff, but it's easy to trip over your own tongue, believe me, and only through saying these things for many years am I able to say them and then catch myself a second later when I say something incorrectly. But the adults are very beautiful, but the entire way through, from the time they hatch, they resemble little black ants, and I think they're just so amazing at that stage. And then it looks like a different animal every time they shed their skin. It looks like a completely new species, different species. And one of the really great things about them is what they do when a predator comes near them. Not necessarily even a bird or anything large, but other insects and everything. What they do is they try to intimidate it through these hilarious little arm movements that they make. Forelegs is what they are, not actually arms, but they just kind of they do this little boxing thing kind of, and then they'll stretch their arms out like this. But it's very rhythmic, and it almost looks like they're dancing. And one of my favorite things to do, many of my Instagram followers, they like to hear me talking about bugs, and I talk in very slow, calm tones. And when I'm looking at spiders, it helps people to, it diminishes their fear of spiders when I'm handling it and I'm speaking very softly and slowly. But one of my favorite things to do is to put these arm movements of mantises to music in the background, and then they're just dancing fools. It's just so wonderful to watch, and they've got the moves like Jagger, I guess you could say. So that is my favorite species to recommend because they are very entertaining to watch. They do really well as pets. They're not difficult, they're rather simple if you have the right setup for them. And they're just so much fun to watch. Thank you very much for your question. So somebody asked me what my favorite spider was, and I absolutely don't have a favorite spider, but one group of spiders that I really like are these flatties, also called selenopid crab spiders in the family Selenopidae. And they're very flat. Where my parents live in Mexico, they call them wall spiders because you will often see them coming out from behind picture frames on the wall. And they are extremely flat spiders. And you will get to see us collecting some of these or attempting to collect these extremely fast spiders in Arizona in an upcoming video. Thank you for the question. The next question was about communal setups. This is a really hot topic in the hobby. A lot of people talking about bioactive vivariums, fancy word for terrarium. This often means that there is sort of a primary pet in the tank and then sort of a support crew that consists of tank cleaners. But even before that became a thing, there were lots of people experimenting with communal tanks. I remember from, 15 or so years ago, I call him C. I used to chat with him on Arachnoboards now and then. And he's been a customer of mine off and on for a couple decades now, it seems. He was the first person I ever knew. He had, I swear, like roaches and millipedes and isopods. He had a big tank. And I remember he dropped a bunch of Florida whip spiders, the Phrynis margin maculatus. Maculata or maculatus? Anyway, he dropped a bunch of them in there. And they reproduced really well for him. And I was astonished by his success with them because so many people seem to have trouble with those in the first place, keeping them alive or at least reproducing them in captivity. And he just had a whole lot of success with it in a communal setup. And I just found that so fascinating. Another tank that is fairly often done are millipede setups where you might have orthoporus, the desert millipedes in there, and then some other species that prefer more moist environments. And so what keepers that want to keep those communally do often is set up what's called a moisture gradient in the tank. And so you'll have a 10-gallon tank, and you will have the substrate, however deep in the tank, and you will pour water into one side of the tank, but leave the other side unwatered. And of course, that water that goes down into the substrate will sort of saturate over, make its way across, and provide a gradient from the wettest portion to the driest portion. And the assumption is that the animals living in there will find the spot that they most prefer in terms of moisture levels. It's really hard, nobody really makes a science of it. And there are so many inconsistencies with how frequently people add water and what exact species they are keeping. It's hard to draw conclusions in many cases for what works and what doesn't, unless you talk to these people specifically. Me, myself, I tend not to keep more than one species in a tank. And that's because I really want to be able to observe how well that species is doing and to minimize the risk factors for things that can go wrong. And so that when something does go wrong, it's not complicated by the fact that there's something else living there in that tank with them. So I tend not to keep too many things communally. I do have some tanks set up that I sort of rotate different things into, and by virtue of, maybe I might be mostly sold out of Vanon's harvestmen, and then I'll get some millipedes in, and I might drop the millipedes into that tank just because it's almost empty and I don't have time, or I know that the Vanons are going to sell very quickly anyway. It's the last few of them. And so I'll drop the millipedes in there with them. And so for a while, it's a communal setup, you could say. I have some isopod tanks like that I routinely drop millipedes into, and then isopods. It's often nice to have a seasoned tank in the same way that people will only replace the water in a fish tank, maybe pull a third of the water out and add another third of water because you want the same microorganisms to, be present in the ecosystem. You don't want to upset the tank. When you start a new tank with new substrate in it, it often has to go through a cycling process, as it with fish tanks, where an equilibrium happens in the tank on the microorganism level. And so you'll see mold in there for the first month or two. And so I tend to move things into tanks of substrate that I've had for a long time. And, I'll add a new layer of leaves or food or whatever in there, or maybe pull out some of the substrate and add in some new substrate, so that the tank doesn't have to go through that initial cycling process where mold and stuff is often produced as that equilibrium is established. So I guess that pretty much concludes my answer to this question. Thank you. The next question, it's one I've gotten before, is if I discovered an insect, would I name it after myself? Now, if both of those things happened, if I had the opportunity to name it after myself, I'm not a taxonomist, I don't write scientific papers, and so certainly there would be another human being involved in all of this, and I could go into more detail on how that all works. But to keep it simple, I will just say that yes, I probably would name it after myself. We're all going to die. I have passed my own genes on to my daughter, and there is some comfort in that. Nobody likes to confront death, and that's sort of what this topic is about for me. It's about the immortality that would come, in a sense, from not just passing the genes on to your own children. It's one of the purposes of of life on this planet is you achieve immortality through passing your genes on. But in having something named after you, I think that's another way that you can gain some satisfaction, depending on who you are, in the idea that you won't always be around. I remember probably, I don't know, over 20 years ago now, I had a star named after my dad. I think the company is called the International Star Registry, and I don't think he ever cared about it, but I think it's really cool that there is a star up in the sky that is named after my dad. And in the same way, I think it would be wonderful, and there could be nothing better than having children myself, to have an insect named after me for all of time, because we're all just a few generations away from being entirely forgotten anyway. And there's something sad about that, and there's something beautiful about that, and that's my answer. The next question, got an email. The next question is a quick and easy one. Somebody asked, what is my favorite group within Hymenoptera? The order Hymenoptera includes bees, ants, wasps, and a group called Symphyta, which includes horntails and sawflies, things called wood wasps. And of all the hymenopterans, my personal favorite group are the sawflies. And I don't have a lot to say about them, really. They aren't something that anybody keeps as a pet, but I just like the way they look, and I like the fact that they can't sting, I guess. And I'm going to show you a little video clip after this just to kind of give you an idea for what they look like. I just think they're gorgeous. That's it.
Fail.
He's like, no. Refuse.
I'm trying my best here, okay?
Don't knock them on the floor. Oh my god.
Oh, no!
Oh, now he's got jelly wing.
Nah, he'll be alright. There you go. Oh, he's loving it. Look at that.
Oh yeah. That's the good stuff right there. It knows where it's going too. Sees the other ones over there.
Follow the trail to the gummy dessert.
Is it from like Candyland or something?
Creepy at all.
That's exactly like something that you would fucking say.
Follow the trail to the gummy dessert.
Oh my god. The eyes. You see the eyes?
They're red.
Beautiful.
Yeah. The next question comes from Sadie, who is Outdoor Girl on Instagram. And I don't usually mention people's names, but I think Sadie probably won't mind, since she also has a YouTube channel and a social media presence. Sadie is a young girl. I have not met her personally, though she lives rather close to me. She has been involved with some of the Portland Insectarium events that Jessica, who works for me here at Bugs in Cyberspace, runs. And she's also spent a lot of time with my good friend Jesse Green, who is sponsoring this contest with this Black Widow sticker and this stag beetle pin. And everybody that spends time with her loves her. And I encourage you all to go check out her account, both on Instagram and YouTube. She has so much enthusiasm. It's funny because even as grown-ups like Jesse and I, we're both so enthusiastic about bugs all the time that we are practically children still. Well, Sadie is a wonderful ambassador for bugs, and social media was not around when Jesse and I were that age, and so it's wonderful to see the world through her eyes, and she's just one of my favorite people to watch on social media as she experiences new bugs, which again is all we as adults are doing all the time too, the people who love what we love, because there are so many and it's always something different. And so I almost forgot what your question was, Sadie, but it was, what is the best state to visit to see bugs? And then what is the best time to go? And it will be no surprise to you, because I know that you follow Jesse and I and our travels and have probably watched every clip I've put up from our summer trip to Arizona here back in late July to early August. And so it's obvious that Arizona is my favorite place to go for bugs in the United States anyway. And as far as when to go, well, you probably want to know why. You already know why, but other people may not know why. It's because there is such a diversity of bugs out there in such a short period of time, because bug season is very brief. And so everything comes out at once when the rains come in Arizona, those monsoon rains. And so the desert just springs to life. And of course, we're not just thinking about the cactuses and the desert floor, but those sky islands, like where Madera Canyon is. I did some videos on that, and I have a few more Madera Canyon videos to upload here to my YouTube channel soon. But up there at elevation, the temperatures are cooler and the trees are different. You have oaks and pine trees and juniper, as well as a bunch of other kinds of plants that provide these safe havens in the middle of the desert for all kinds of bugs, which then benefit by that solar energy coming from the sun at the lower latitudes, and things are flying up from Mexico and from other directions. And it's just the most amazing place to collect and to see so many different plants and animals otherwise. Great assortment of hummingbirds and other birds down there, like the elegant trogon. A beautiful place to visit for any reason at all. But as to when, it really depends on what you want to see. If you're interested in giant silk moths, then the time to go is probably late June to mid-July. If you want to see large beetles, I would recommend you go in late July to mid-August. And then, of course, it's a big state, and you will find different things in different places. I have many times over the years tried to make an entire tour of the state in a week or two trip. I have learned as I've gotten older and made this trip many times with the same group of guys, mostly, that we really prefer now to stay in one place and spend a lot of time in that one place. And so if you go, I would recommend that you, wherever you're staying, you stay there and just venture out and make a trip of that immediate vicinity. Like, spend a few days in Madera Canyon if you're going to be down in Arizona for only a few days. Don't try to visit too many places during a short trip, or you'll just be kind of skimming the surface. You won't, it's even Madera Canyon, the Santa Rita Mountains there. There's so much to see, so much territory to cover, so much diversity from the desert floor to the area around the lodge and the creek and Proctor Road and the creek down there where it runs into the desert floor, and then up higher at elevation, and then day collecting, and then night collecting. There's just a lot to do and see just in that one place, and that would be a great first place to go, specifically in that state. And then depending on what you want to see, you go somewhere between the tail end of June and I would say August, somewhere in that range, and you will not be disappointed. If you're a bug lover, you will see more than you ever imagined, and you will just have the time of your life. Thank you for your question, Sadie. I want to thank you all on Instagram first for participating in this contest. I really enjoy Instagram. It's one of my favorite social media platforms. I got on there 2 or 3 years ago. It must have been 3 years ago. And it's really been the best thing I've ever done in the pet bug hobby. I've just really enjoyed making the 1-minute videos and uploading them and sharing what I love with all of you and reading your responses. And I think I do a pretty good job of replying to a lot of people. I've slipped a little bit in that regard lately. I do spread myself really thin between answering all of the emails through my multiple websites and managing the forums that I manage, and answering all of the questions and everything through direct messages and private messages on these various sites and platforms, and just packing the orders and just going about the daily business. I work all day every day, and I do it because I love it, and I think that you guys probably all know that about me. So I want to thank you first on Instagram, and also I want to extend my appreciation to my YouTube audience. I do plan to grow my YouTube channel. I'm going to be focusing a lot on that, and I apologize to the Instagram people for you having to share me with YouTube now, but it is the future. It's the only platform that will actually pay me to do these videos. Instagram is a ton of fun, and I will do it forever. And I'm also on TikTok now. I just started up about, 6 or 8 weeks ago. I'm not really sure. Had a video go viral on there, and so I accrued 33,000 followers in very short time, having a ton of fun on there. It's probably my favorite social media platform, I'm sorry to say. But the other thing I want to say very quickly here, I want to say thank you to Shapes in Nature. My good friend Jesse, his business, he makes these shirts. This is the I'd Rather Be Bug Hunting shirt, and lots of other great bug shirts. I will probably wear one every time I make a video for YouTube and I have to put myself in front of the camera. He also makes these little pins. This has got a stag beetle on it. He's got some other ones too. He makes a ton of stickers. And this is the Black Widow sticker, one of the other prizes for this contest here. Jesse's a great guy, and he does a lot to support me, and I try to return the favor all the time. He's one of the neatest people that I've ever met in the hobby, and I can safely say that I have replaced all of my friends in life with bug people, and that's just the way I like it. I also want to thank Oren McMonigal from Invertebrates Magazine. I don't know how long he's been publishing this magazine. It is absolutely a labor of love. I have to guess that it was probably around 2000 or 2001 that he started this magazine, and it is so much work for him. What he does is he requests articles from other hobbyists that they write, and he often finds himself writing a lot of them himself, but he's been doing this, and I mean, these are quarterly issues, so 4 issues per year. He's been doing this now for almost 20 years, and what a neat thing this has been for the hobby. I've written for him a few times, not nearly as many times as I should have. Like I said earlier, I'm spread really, really thin, but consider supporting Oren's work. He wrote so many of the pet bug books, like the dung beetle book that I showed you earlier, to support our hobby. He's done so much to promote the hobby, and he is a dear friend of mine of about 20 years now, and I really appreciate the extra magazines that he sends to me when I place book orders with him, so that I may distribute these to my customers and my followers and subscribers on social media. So I'll just give you a quick rundown here of some of the things that he talks about in this particular issue. Uticella, flower beetles. He's got some crustaceans in here. He's got anemones and prawns, it says there. He's got some beetle products from Japan, article about that. And then the featured invertebrate, there is a whip spider of some kind. So probably a few other articles in here as well. The Hairtall is listed up in the front, I don't think, but I just wanted to say thank you to those two people for supporting me, and if anybody else out there wants to donate some products for contests, I'm certainly willing to promote you. I want to thank everyone again for participating and watching, and if you have any comments down below, I look forward to answering them.
Hey,
Thank you
if
very
you like
much.
me, give me one of those thumbs up, and please subscribe and hit the little bell so you know when I post next. Please share me with your friends on social media. Thank you for watching.